Stad fue Juana. Havon huia huaie, ie stad huacum. Dambad peto, edadwe stad bo.
About 15 years ago, I was given an opportunity to teach a college-level science fiction literature class, and I agreed to teach the class because I had a long-time interest in the influence of science on literature, but I didn't know that much about science fiction at the time. As I prepared for that class, I had two pivotal experiences that enabled me to read science fiction literature, to understand its place in the literary tradition, and to devote a considerable amount of both professional and personal time to the development of scholarship in science fiction literature. The first of those experiences was what I called a going through the door experience. I read about 8 or 10 science fiction novels, trying desperately to fit this material into what I already knew from my fairly traditional literary education, and of course it wouldn't work. But I suddenly had the feeling that I understood the science fiction perspective, that indeed the science fiction writer is creating an alternate world, and that that writer has the entire realm of the universe, both in time and space, as a possibility for the setting. That's what science fiction is all about. There's another quality to a good science fiction story, and that's this. When you look up from having finished reading a really fine science fiction story or novel, there's the sense that your own reality is different, what I call sometimes the armchair reality. The second experience that I had was when I began reading the novels of Ursula Le Guin, and I discovered in that author a fine imagination, an ability to create alternate worlds in an incredible detail. She could tell you the architecture, for example, of the homes that her otherworld characters lived in. She could tell you what kind of tea they drank. She even created languages and wrote poetry in those languages for some of her novels. Her characters, whether they were visiting a planet that was still locked in an ice age or visiting a planet where the world was made up entirely of forest and sea, were often outlanders, coming to terms, trying to face an alien culture, an alien form of human life. And as they struggled with these alien cultures, they were struggling with the same questions that we have to struggle with. What does it mean, after all, to be human? Where is home? Can we create a society, a social and political structure in which we can be both free and happy? Why are people always telling stories? To give you an idea of Le Guin's world-making abilities, I'd like to look briefly at 2 of her 17 novels. Let's look at her fantasy novel, A Wizard of Earthsea, published in 1967, and one of her science fiction novels, The Word for World is Forest, published in 1972, but written in the winter of 1967-68, just after she had finished A Wizard of Earthsea. And I'll stop in between my discussion of these 2 novels, slight pause, to talk about the difference between fantasy and science fiction. Although she did not know it at the time that she was writing A Wizard of Earthsea, it would develop into a series of first 3 and then 4 novels. The Tombs of Atuan was published in 1971, The Farthest Shore in 1972, and then after several years, in 1990, the 4th novel, Tahanu. Just inside the cover of all editions of the first book of the Earthsea trilogy is a map of Earthsea. And as you can see, it is an archipelago, a world of earth and sea. Not only does Earthsea describe literally this world, it figuratively describes the ethical and spiritual nature of Earthsea. The people understand that everything that exists belongs to a network of existence, and the slightest change in anything in that world changes the entire world. It is a finely balanced tension between earth and sea. A Wizard of Earthsea tells the story of the education of one of the greatest mages of Earthsea. It is a man by the name of Ged, or as many people call him, Sparrowhawk. He begins life here on the island of Gaunt. And living there, one of the old mages of Earthsea comes to understand that Ged has a tremendous power for using magic. And he arranges for him to go to the school for wizards. So Ged goes, in a sense, we're talking about the college for wizards, if you can imagine such a thing existing. Ged sailed from Gaunt down to the island of Roke, to the College of Wizards. Although he didn't realize it at the time, this first sailing of Ged's was to lead to a tremendous journey in the young years of his life. From Roke, after he became a wizard, he would eventually go out to the westernmost edge of Earthsea, out to the islands where the dragons live, back eastward and north to the island of Oskel, back to Gaunt for a short stop, and then on out to the farthest east reaches of Earthsea. Ged's journey occurs because only he has the necessary knowledge and power to deal with the shadow that threatens to overwhelm his wizardly power, and in that context then threaten the very existence of Earthsea itself. As you know, the physical journey of a young person is often used to symbolize the journey into the self, that journey from adolescence to adulthood. So a Wizard of Earthsea is what we call a coming-of-age story. Ged struggles to learn many of the hard lessons that we all have to learn on that journey toward adulthood. That pride often gets us into trouble, that we must accept the consequences for our actions, that we often don't know the consequences of our actions at the time that we're undertaking them, and that knowing when not to act is often just as important as knowing when to act. In fact, the coming-of-age story is part of every volume in the Earthsea series of novels. A new adolescent on the threshold of adulthood is introduced, and his or her particular travels, particular problems are detailed in the course of the novel. Furthermore, the whole coming-of-age experience is suggested by Le Guin to be a lifelong experience. For Ged appears in each of these 4 novels, and he grows older and eventually retires from being a wizard completely, so that the coming-of-age process is one that encompasses our entire life. A Wizard of Earthsea is also a story about the artist. The wizard's craft, which allows him to learn spells to change the shapes of things, which allows him to summon things into existence that we didn't know were there, which allows him to find just the right word to name something that someone else has been unable to name. These are all very much like the storyteller's art. Throughout the Earthsea books, then, we also learn about the artist's search to control the imagination, to learn about language, to learn about the connection between imagination and reality. And in fact, this very connection between imagination and reality is one of the things that helps distinguish for us fantasy and science fiction. Le Guin often uses the metaphor of the spectrum to speak of the similarities and differences between fantasy and science fiction. They belong on the same spectrum as genres of literature because both are types of literature in which radically different alternate worlds are being created, worlds that are different from the here and now, from our armchair reality. But they belong at different ends of the spectrum because of the ways in which the authors make those worlds believable, make them credible. The fantasy world on one end brings into the book things that do not belong to part of our empirical reality. Like myth, like dream, fantasy literature assumes the existence of things beyond empirical reality. Le Guin has often said that her fantasy books explore inner lands. The journey of discovery is a journey into the self, and it is a journey that has both psychological and moral implications. At the other end of the spectrum, science fiction literature creates alternate worlds by supposing a radical difference from some known body of knowledge in some realm of science. But once that radical difference is proposed, then the world is made credible by the author using both science as a body of knowledge and a theory of inquiry. In fact, Le Guin has often referred to her science fiction novels as thought experiments. So let's look at the second novel, The Word for World is Forest, published in 1972. This is a science fiction novel that comes partway through Le Guin's series of science fiction novels. Now, her science fiction novels do not form a closely knit series in the way that the Earthsea books do, but her science fiction novels do usually share a common setting. Le Guin proposes that many, many years ago, perhaps as many as 1 million years ago, 80 or more worlds, 80 or more known planets were seeded by human beings from the planet Hain. Therefore, in her science fiction novels, whatever life form, whatever human type of life form is found on a new planet is known to be human. These are our relatives. The Hainish world, then, is based on that very, very old story of human expansion, a story for which we can find many examples. We can think of the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the garden. We can think of the expansion of the Roman Empire, the Austrian Empire, the British Empire that led to the development of this country, and then, of course, our own country's development of the American West. Although the journey of discovery also appears in Le Guin's science fiction novels, it is more in the background. In the foreground of these novels, Le Guin is concerned with social, political, cultural issues. She imagines alternative political structures, meetings between a single diplomat, a single envoy, and what appears to him a totally alien world and culture. A Word for World is Forest takes place on a planet named Athshee. Here the people have developed in such a way as to be totally integrated with their world of forest. They are fairly small people covered with short green fur. They have learned to build in and slightly above the roots of trees. They even describe their kinship relationship like species of trees. They have achieved a perfect ecological balance with all aspects of their planet and with each other. Although they hunt the forest animals, they have neither war nor murder. The tensions, the unexpressed emotions and frustrations that might lead in another culture to either personal violence or institutionalized violence are handled by the Athsheans through a very, very complex, sophisticated form of dreaming. However, at the beginning of this novel, the physical and cultural world of the Athsheans is being threatened by the arrival of loggers from the planet Earth. Earth has effectually destroyed its ecological balance. There are no trees left on Earth. Lumber to people from Earth is like gold. So an arm of the military has come from the planet Earth to Athshee to mine the forests. They exploit Athshee and its people in all possible ways. They enslave the Athsheans, they rape the women, they destroy the forest, threatening to destroy the very planet itself and make it into a desert. Le Guin tells the story of this conflict in alternating chapters, shifting from one point of view to another, so that the reader has the experience of being inside the mind of each of these humans as they experience this conflict from their own perspective. Captain Davidson, the leader of one of the logging crews, tells 3 chapters. Lyubov, an ethnologist from India, tells 2. And then there are 3 chapters told from the point of view of Selver, an Athshean native. Before the other Hainish worlds, however, can intervene in this conflict between Terrans and Athsheans, the Athsheans have learned to go to war. Selver has led his people in war against the Terrans. Lyubov has died. Captain Davidson has gone insane. The failure of these 2 human groups to find a way to bridge their differences is one of the darkest moments in all of Le Guin's Hainish history. no way was found to construct a reality in which the Ashians and the Terrans could live together. In this discussion of two of Le Guin's novels, I hope you can see that storytelling is both instructional and delightful for her. The sheer pleasure of imaginative creation comes through in her detailed creation of these alternate worlds. She invites us to experience her worlds. She invites us to create worlds of our own in which we imagine how we might get along. The use of the imagination is also an ethical commitment for Ursula Le Guin. I hear her saying many things in these novels, but among the things I hear her saying is certainly this: if we can imagine a different world, if we can tell a story about it, then we are on our way to making it happen. If we can dream of a better world, a different kind of human society, a different understanding of the environment, different forms of communication, so that the self and other are not as separated, not as different as we might think, then we've taken a major step toward making that better world come into existence. Likewise, if we can dream, if we can tell a story about a world gone wrong, then perhaps we can avoid the creation of such a world. So as you can see, the novels of Ursula K. Le Guin, both the fantasy and the science fiction, are also about the here and now.